some point. And I'm going to record on Zoom too. Go for backup. To cloud. Okay, so we're recording. And just want to introduce. Thank you all for coming out to the 5amMesterScrum Meetup group, which is in the evening and not at 5 a.m. in the morning, because that's kind of when we do it. And Jennifer here, Jennifer Steelman, she is a Kanban expert. Well, she teaches Kanban, and she's definitely an Agile coach expert from the IC Agile program. And we met a few years ago, and I will let Jennifer take the show and share what she wants, and we're going to work in the Miro board. We'll probably share some things in chat, I think, if you want people. Do we have to participate on Miro? Okay. 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 So yeah, the Better Online and LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. You can message me, and I'll see that, and I'll relay that to Jennifer if we get there. And for the ones that are on Zoom who registered ahead of time, because we're trying to get the Zoom crashers to a minimum this time, feel free, and we'll be good on that. Okay, with that, Jennifer, I'll let you take away and go for it. Hey, Jennifer, I got to check on one thing on the sound because I can't hear you on YouTube. So I want to make sure I got it good. Yeah. Hey, Jennifer, I got to check on one thing on the sound because I can't hear you on YouTube. So I want to make sure I got it good. Yeah. Hey, Jennifer, I got to check on one thing on the sound because I can't hear you on YouTube. So I want to make sure I got it good. Speaker, microphone. Why is it not working? Okay, I will in a second. All right, in a second. Testing. Sorry about that. I'm testing. Go ahead and say something, Jennifer. And go ahead and talk. Give some intro stuff, and I'm gonna work on the other part. Sorry about that. I'm testing. Go ahead and say something, Jennifer. And go ahead and talk. Give some intro stuff, and I'm gonna work on the other part. Forget it. Sorry about that. Testing. Go ahead and say something, Jennifer. Go ahead and talk.
And I'm not sure I actually, now that I'm looking in chat, Greg, are we able to type?
Go ahead and say something, Jennifer.
Yeah, I'm only able to type to Greg.
That's what I'm seeing too. All right, well, feel free to shout it out. What comes to mind when I ask the question, what is Kanban?
The pool system.
Full system. Okay. Good.
Visual.
Visual.
Flow of work, optimal flow of work, hopefully.
Okay, great.
Optimizing WIP.
Optimizing WIP. Okay, using WIP. That's what I'm seeing too. All right, well, feel free to shout it out. All right, I am going to shut the door. The dog is wanting me to take her out, but I'll deal with that later.
Okay, you should be good.
Okay.
I'm hearing you on LinkedIn, so I think we're working.
All right, great. So, we weren't able to use chat, but we just kind of improvised by shouting it out. I'll go ahead and move it now. So, definition from the Kanban guide is that Kanban is a strategy for optimizing flow value through a process that creates a visual pull-based system. So I don't know if you had seen that ahead of time, but many of you said, I heard visual, I heard pull-based, optimizing flow. So all correct answers. And we don't actually have WIP in this definition, but we do talk about WIP. WIP is key, and we'll be covering that just a little bit later. So the Pro Kanban put out a Kanban guide in 2020. If you haven't seen that yet, it is worth checking out. As a strategy, so a lot of teams I start with want to know, is it Kanban, or is it, do you do Kanban or do Scrum? You're either doing Kanban or Scrum. And Actually, as a strategy, Kanban has been distilled down to the Kanban guide. It's been distilled down to a lightweight essentials so that you can use it with other frameworks. I do see Karen, you have a question?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you were sharing a screen, but I'm not seeing anything.
Oh, I am not sharing my screen any longer. I apologize. I'm glad I read it then. And you didn't see what I did. You didn't see my other screen either. That's okay. Thank you for calling that out. Let me do that again. I should be sharing the screen. All right, can we see it now? Okay,
Yep.
great. All right. So yeah, Kanban is a strategy optimizing the flow of value through a process that uses a visual pull-based system. And that is from the Kanban guide. Not from Pero Kanban directly, but we do follow it. So it was written external to Pero Kanban, but we do follow it very closely. It is on the underpinning of everything that we just kind of train about and follow. Okay, so thank you for sharing. Thank you for pointing out that I was not sharing my screen. I'm going to move on to the next one. Common problems in Kanban. So, what things that I hear a lot, or some common things that I see teams get incorrect, or maybe causes confusion is that I think there's a lack of understanding. I see a lot of teams that they are using the process in Jira. They have that Kanban board set up. They have, it says right on the screen that they're doing Kanban, so they must be doing Kanban. Or that you have cards on the board, so you're doing Kanban. That is a start. It starts creating some format to your process, but there are other things that fall in line with it too that you have to put in place or practice to actually be doing Kanban. So I'll go over a few of those. Another one that I hear a lot is Kanban work can take as long as needed. I've come into board teams where they may have an item on their board for 350 days. They're no longer really working it. They haven't worked it for a while. They've probably forgotten why it's there any longer, but it's still there. So that's another example of how things can sit, and that is not something that is there's obviously less extreme, but you still want to in Kanban work at breaking down things into the smallest piece of value that you can bring through your system.
Hey Jennifer, I got a question. What about the notion that Kanban's faster than Scrum, but then it takes longer for the Kanban teams to push things through their cycle? I've seen that a few times.
So let me see if so it seems like when you say faster than
Like, let's say
Scrum.
you have a 2-week time box in Scrum, right?
Right.
But the justification for Kanban, they say, is they can get a quicker turnaround on product going into production. Sometimes I've heard that, and I go, well, you're not quicker than the Scrum team, so how does that justification work?
I don't know that so it sounds like a team that you've worked with is that's what they're saying, that they can get it faster by using Kanban than trying to bring things into a 2-week sprint. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'd ask them to show you, like, can they? So it's often I think we come up with a lot of
What was that
you
metric you came up
can-
the other day? Was it SLE or?
SLE, yes. So service level expectation can be, I do have some information about that, just in
Okay.
a little bit, and if you're kind of parking lot. Do you hear the scratching on my door right now? No, I do. I'm gonna open the door so she can come back in, and hopefully she doesn't bark at me, or I'll have to kick her out again. Okay. She might come up and join me on my lap. That's one way to keep her quiet. So another one is, I hear a lot is Kanban is for maintenance work. And yeah, it can be good for maintenance work, but it can be used for all kinds of work. So it can be used for complex knowledge work as well. And it really depends on the team. What works best for the team. It's very disciplined to follow Kanban. A lot of teams think that, and I think that maybe they're getting rid of some of the rules, and I think we maybe swap for a different set of rules, but there's still rules that the team needs to follow, and really actively managing the work through their process. So I want to invite you to share what are some of the problems you've seen in your teams who are trying to use Kanban. For those of you on the call, if you want to shout it out. Greg, I don't know if you are monitoring the chat online. I don't have visibility to that on my screen.
Hi, this is Carlos. This is my first time joining this group. So actually the 3 bullet items that you have, that's exactly what I've seen in some of the teams. I work as a contractor, so I've been on different companies, different projects. And normally when I've seen and I use Kanban is for maintenance work, specifically for maintenance releases, when the team really can commit to a specific date to deliver a feature or a bug fix, or maybe it's going to take some time to do the root cause analysis. That's when we've used Kanban. It can take as long as needed per se, but it tends to get exploited by the developers, right? So sometimes they have multiple responsibilities and they're being pulled in all different directions. One of the things that I had in particular with the team is the same development team was doing the bug fixing as well as doing the development of a new platform in parallel. So for the maintenance, we use Kanban, and they were just taking as long as needed, quote unquote.
Right.
So that's one of the issues that I've seen. Or I guess one of the realities of teams implementing Kanban.
Yeah, and I think I've seen that as well. I think a lot of times, one of the challenges teams have is those, as you mentioned, work comes from a lot of different directions, and so you have the next person who's bringing the fire that you're trying to help them put out. Or the person who you helped last time is now calling you for some help, and so you're trying to help them. And the result is the things that you've been working on are now set aside so that you can help the person on the phone or chat or however they've reached out to you. Yeah. Anyone else want to share a problem that you've seen on your teams?
Well, it's not on my team per se, but I notice a lot of time people just doing work using Jira and they call it Kanban, which is not. They say, well, we're not doing Scrum because we're working Kanban. And all they do is just tracking work in Jira.
Right. I've seen teams do that too. Yeah, that's another. Oh, and that kind of goes along with we have cards on a board.
Yeah, it's an anti-pattern.
And it says right there in Jira, Kanban, it's the Kanban board. So yeah, thank you. All right, let's move I'm going to share some basics. Basic practices and metrics. So in Kanban, there's some practices, and that's defining and visualizing your workflow, actively managing your workflow, and improving the workflow. And I'm gonna share a little bit more about one of those here in a moment. I also want to bring in, share that there are 4 minimum metrics that we are work in progress and managing your work item age are the two that I'm going to share. They're both things that you can do to manage during their work while their work is still in process. So they're both leading indicators that can impact your predictability. So the 3 that I'm going to focus on will be, so of these 3 practices and 4 metrics, we're going to look more closely at the defining and visualizing your workflow and limiting work in progress and managing work item aged. And that's because as I've worked with teams, I feel like those are foundational to how a team moves through their day-to-day work in regards to their management and whatever tool they've used, whether it's Jira or DevOps or something else, to manage their work. So if you set up how you're defining the work and how you're visualizing it is foundational to how you can manage it, and then those flow into some of those lagging indicators of cycle time and input and manage towards those and see how you're doing with the things that you're changing as you move through your daily work. So first thing that I'm going to share with you in regards to defining and visualizing your work, we have in Kanban what's called a definition of workflow. And this is something I didn't really, in my first learnings of Kanban, I didn't put that together, that there was a definition of workflow that you talked about as a team. I got that there's a Kanban board and there's things you have on that Kanban board, and those things help you manage your work. Having this conversation with the team and building that shared understanding of what the definition of workflow is, as I work with teams now, just so many teams have your definition of ready and your definition of done, and they're familiar with that from working on Scrum or whatever they might be working with. They can bring those into the Kanban teams as well. But I also, with Kanban, bring in a doctor to launching a team or helping a team improve their Kanban is foundationally, if they don't have their definition of workflow set up yet and decided as a team, then that's where we start. So it's creating that shared understanding of what they're going to visualize and how they're going to manage their board, how they're going to manage the work that flows through their system. And all of that, once you have that, determined, it is visualized in the board that they have in whatever tool or on the wall. There's 6 minimum elements in it, and that is the kinds of work items that you have. So what are your work types? Your tools will drive you to have maybe certain lingo that you call those. So what you may call them in your in one team versus another, or one organization versus another, but your items of value, your work items, what those things are. It could be your stories, it could call them PBIs, it could be bugs, you might have maintenance items, whatever you call them, what type of work are you pulling in? So you define that. You're also defining the work states, which are the statuses that your work is going to go through. Like, is it going through in progress? Do you have a column, an in progress state, a state, or testing state? What are the states that your work goes through? And then, as Salva mentioned earlier, limiting that work in progress. So limiting the work in progress helps create the pull system. You also need to define where's your work starting and where is it ending. So where is it coming into the process and where is it leaving? And then explicit policies. And this is the thing that you miss if you just try to work with a board. And you might add WIP limit, but a lot of times if a team hasn't gone through and created that definition of workflow, one of the things that I've seen them not do is those explicit policies. And explicit policies can be around like how you're going to manage that workflow. What happens when you're pulling it through through the board and you find a defect? So you're going through the process. You're working on the work. You pass the work on to the next group. That work pulls that team, that person pulls it in. You start testing and they find a defect. What do they do? It could also be around what happens when there's an urgent issue that comes up and everybody on the team is working, that you've already met your WIP limit. You're already at your WIP limit and there's a new hot thing that comes up. How is the team going to handle that? So it's building policies around that so that as those things come up, your team has that language to, has determined how they're going to work together, how they're going to handle those things so that they can talk to whoever's bringing that new work to them and share their policy. So maybe maybe it is that, it can vary from team to team. It can vary from the type of work you're doing, but it gives them that ability to make that decision for what works best for their team. And the final thing, the one that Greg, you called out earlier, is that service level expectation, the SLE. And that is based on the data. So data that you've had come through your process before, you start learning the amount of time that things take typically to come through your board. So we'll talk, I do have a slide that gets it a little more into that SLE. Greg, I know we started a bit late. How are we doing on time? Do you want, I can kind of.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay.
We still got another 20 minutes.
Okay, great. So some of these I'm going to go pretty quickly through, and if there's any questions or anything that comes up in chat, Greg, will you please let me know? Not the Zoom chat, but online.
Sure.
For any of you in the room, please feel free to interrupt me. I may or may not see. I can see about 5 of you on my screen right now. So just raising a hand, I might miss it. Shout out is going to be, catch me a little faster. And I'm okay with being interrupted. So all those pieces of the definition of workflow, I said that they are visualized into the board that you have. And this is what I mean when I say that. So I've mocked up a little sample of a board, and we have some work on the board and some information here. So it's as simple as your explicit policies. So along these little green cards, we have the 6 things I just talked about in the previous slide. So your explicit policies, I have a few samples here. This is just what, these aren't set in stone. They don't have to be copied by everyone, but an example would be, when a defect comes up, we will fix it in place. Another team might say it needs to, you need to create something for it, or you need to move it backwards. Generally speaking, or in, maybe not so generally speaking, in Kanban, work will flow through a consistent direction through the board. In this board here, that is from left to right. So if something was if you were to find a defect, ideally you would fix it in place rather than moving it backwards. A card can go backwards if it didn't meet all of the criteria from the column before, from the work state before. So you think of each of these columns as having, she needs to make an appearance. I'm getting noisy over here. If you think of each of these columns as having their own entrance and exit criteria, if something doesn't meet the exit criteria of the column before, that's when something would go backwards. Now, I've worked on a lot of teams. I know that we don't often practice that. And so use what's consistent in your organization, what works best for the team. So an explicit policy would be what happens when something like that comes up. The other one I mentioned earlier, if something urgent comes up, what do you do? Well, if you're breaking things down in the smallest reasonable thing possible, the smallest increment of value, and you are gaining some predictability of how long things move through your board, then you begin to know the amount of time something's going to take. And so if you have things that are getting, that you have in flight, and you have somebody who's just finishing something up and that new item's coming in, can it wait until one of the team members finish something? And once that team member finishes, then they can pick it up. If you know that things are taking 3 days to get through your system, and this new thing to be done in 2 weeks, then you don't need to start it, right away, because you've got some time within that process. And if your SLE says you have a 3-day turnaround, that 3 days, I'm going to give it a little more clearly later. It's not just 3 days; it's 3 days based on a forecast. So you're giving a percentage of time. So I'll go a little bit more into that in a moment. Your SLE is in that format. You'll notice that this board has an SLE of 5 days or less with an 85% probability. So another way to say that is 85% of the items that come to our board will be finished in 5 days or less. So if the person requesting that new thing is if that works within that 5 days, or you're looking at it and you're determining, with whoever's helping to create to determine priority of items on your board, those are things that can help in that predictability or help in that prioritization. So your work states are these things that are across. So to do, doing, validate for this board, and then done. Those are your work states. Your work items are, and I didn't define them, but they're all these little blue cards on here. And WIP limits are up here. You have for your doing column, for this doing column, there's a WIP limit of 2, and for validate, there's a WIP limit of 1. You could choose to have a WIP limit of 1 number to go through the whole system. So maybe there's a WIP limit of 3 for the whole board, in which case this team would be meeting that as well. And then also your start and end of workflow. So that is typically one thing where in the board designates that you're pulling it into in process. And typically you'll see that between, after a column like to do, where you start to pull it into in progress. And so I can duplicate this really quickly. I'll show it that this is the start with this designation here, and then this is the finish. And after this is kind of that finish line, things are moving into done. Does that make sense? Any questions on that section?
And if anybody does, they could just unmute themselves and ask a question for free.
All right. So actively manage items in the workflow. Actually, let's see. I mentioned a few of these in the previous slide.
Hey, Jennifer.
Yeah.
I just want to throw a question. Is anybody out there currently using Kanban that's on the Zoom call? And do they have all those things you just mentioned identified? You can chat it or you can just voice it out.
Yes, I am using Kanban with similar states, obviously with different titles based on the company.
Okay. Thanks, Carlos.
I used to do it in the past, not currently.
Thanks, Tala. All right, Jennifer, it's all yours.
Yeah, I think the biggest one I see is people missing that explicit policies, and then as things come up, you don't have that. You just kind of, okay, I'll start it. And I guess if I was to compare it to something in Scrum, so in Scrum teams we have the sprint, and that sprint, you may have your sprint goal or your things that you've committed to in that sprint. If something new comes up, you may have a policy that says that we've got to talk about it as a team to see if this can be pulled into our sprint or if it's going to interrupt.
Hey, Jennifer, real quick, would you mind moving closer to your microphone?
Yes.
Thank you.
So, my dog, I think, created space. So
Your co-presenter.
yes, my co-presenter, this is Marmalade. So I was just gonna say similar. So as a team, maybe as familiar with Scrum moves into Kanban, they would be looking at that those explicit policies to kind of form those kind of rules around how they would handle things that come up in flight, how they would handle things that come up as an interruption to the work that they're already doing. So just a few ways of actively managing the work in your workflow, limiting WIP, ensuring that things aren't piling up in one work state or another, ensuring that things don't age unnecessarily. So using that service level expectation as a reference. If your service level expectation says that things normally take 5 days to get through your board, and you have something that's now sitting at 4 days in your process, what are you doing to keep moving that through? Is it at risk of not making it through, not meeting your SLE? Do team members need to swarm on it? So some of those conversations, if you're noticing that, some of those conversations sound kind of similar to something you might have in Scrum. We're getting close to our sprint end date. What do we need to do? Are we going to finish? Is there any risk of meeting our sprint goal? Here you would have an SLE that's helping to guide you towards consistency, towards that predictability, based on your past data. If you know how long things are going to take to get through the process, then you can use that to help manage that work. And then unblocking blocked work. And all of those are key in helping to build that predictability and in helping to build that data that would provide you predictability with that, and have a valid SLE. Because if you have things that you let go through take as long as it takes. So, or as long as people, I kind of just pick things up and then pick other things up and set stuff aside. And so now you have stuff on your board that's, 300 days or 100 days or 50 days. When those things finish, they're going to have an impact to your data, and including your SLE. So over time, you have a lot of things that go through that have, that take a long time. You may have other things that come through that take a really short time. Maybe they're super easy. So somebody sees it in the backlog and says, oh, I'm just going to knock this out and get it out of the way, but it's not very important. Or they do a whole bunch of those at once. That's going to change their process and make them less predictable if if they're kind of charting things through.
Jennifer, do your teams balk at you that's taking a little long? Like they say, oh, that's not mine.
At first they do. Yeah, it's definitely something that's not something that a lot of teams I start working with are used to doing. A lot of times it's very individual to them, down to the role of the piece of, where the work is in the process. So that might be, I had a team at a prior organization that had testers on the team. And so once something, even though the testing piece was one of the states on the board, once the developer moved that into that testing state, that was, it was done for them. They no longer worried about it. And so shifting that mindset on that team to think of, it's not when, it's not moving it from one column to the next, but that gets it, kind of off your plate. It is getting that thing to all the way finished.
Okay.
So your team, shifting it from a this is my role and I'm going to stay in my lane, to I am responsible for the work that we pull in, and that means going all the way through the process, having that team ownership, shifting to that team ownership of things.
Okay. Sounds good. We got about 8 minutes.
Yeah. And do we want to skip to activity or just kind of get through the slides?
I don't know what the group want. We can do an activity. Can we do one in 8 minutes?
Yeah, let's just continue.
Go for it.
Slava, may I continue on the slides?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So things and controlling your WIP limits. So having that WIP limit on the board. So you saw, your WIP limit of 2, your WIP limit of 1. What are you doing in controlling those WIP limits? And this is just some things here. I'm not going to read through all of these, but if you don't make it explicit, like what is that WIP limit? What are we going to do when something comes in that is that's important, that's somebody says it's high priority? The manager's manager is coming in and saying this needs to be done. What are we going to do? So how do we? What is our rule around that? Represent it on the board if you don't have something. So most tools have something that will designate what your WIP limit is, and if you're exceeding it, or if you're getting some visual cue in there that shows that you're about to reach your WIP limit, so that you can maybe reach out to other team members in your stand-up and say, hey, I'm going to finish this today. Is there something that I can help you work on? And then those can be at multiple levels on the board. So just and as Slava mentioned earlier, it does create that pull system. And something I talked about on the last slide is it helps improve the focus, the collaboration, and that commitment to the team. A service level expectation, I said there was a slide about this, so here it is. That helps, it's a forecast of how long a single work item should take to get through the process. And it includes 2 parts, and that is the probability and the number. So
does that include your backlog or just what's on the board?
I heard 2 people talking there, so let Greg repeat your question, and then
Maybe it's me twice. Is it your backlog or what's on the board?
Oh, right. So your service level expectation is based on your historical data. You're going to use it for the work that's coming in. The team, so this is kind of the greatest benefit and the greatest, use for this is within the team, and the team helping them to determine that age, manage their work item age so that they're not letting things get too old. I also have a team who does share it out with other, with people who are bringing work to them. So that's a service group within my organization. They handle requests from all over the organization, and so they can use that as a tool in two ways. One, the requester often has a step that the team needs them to do in order for the team to be able to call that item done. So a type of validation. And so the team, knowing that they were taking 10 days or less to get items through the board, they started looking at how long does it take to do my piece? You know, like not my piece, but the team's piece. How long are we waiting on the validation step? And then they used that to reach out. They were pulling a new item in. They would reach out and say, hey, we're getting ready to pull this in. We have about 5 days before we're going to need you to be ready to look at it. Are you ready? You know, will you be ready in 5 days? And so they can use that as a tool then to say, you know, the person may be, you know, out 5 days from now. So so they can use that as a kind of a time management tool of, okay, if the person's out, they're not going to be ready. Is there someone else who can review, or should we, you know, put this a little further, you know, let something else come ahead of it first, so that they don't have stuff sitting in there and, you know, in a work state that's waiting on other people. So the two parts of it are a period of elapsed time. So we typically get things done at 10 days or less. And that probability with an 85% chance, you can get that off of your data, depending on how you pull that data and how you view the data. It's a couple of different ways you can look at it, but there's also a fairly simple way to calculate it depending on what's available to you as well. And then it is based on historical data. But if you don't have that historical data yet, you might in the beginning just, you know, guess. You might look at another team's work or your past work or something like that. So it's a guess until you have that data to back it up. And you don't need a lot of data. You can always, you know, use what you've got. You know, maybe it's the guess in the beginning. So you guess it, hey, I think things are going to take. So I had a team that did this actually. They're like, oh yeah, things should take about 3 days. And then we started looking at it and it was taking, you know, like 15.
Ooh.
And so they started looking at it and said, things really feel like they take 3 days. So why are they taking 15? And it was just realizing that they needed to decrease the WIP limits in some of the columns, some of their work states, so that they weren't pulling so many things in because it was causing things to take longer. They were doing some task switching within the teams and trying to work on too many things at once, rather than focusing on finishing the item. So based on that, they were able to show that, no, it's really 15 days, but now that we know it's 15 days, how can we work on improving that? Because it doesn't feel like it should be that long. And so they were able to get that down to, I don't remember what they got it down to, it's been a while, but much closer to the 3 days that they thought it should be than what it was really taking.
Jennifer, so if I hear you correctly, so you're referring service level expectation, you're relating it to each BLI, right? Because in the past, what we use, and that was my impression that is the right way of using it. So service level expectation, let's see, in 10 days, we can complete 6 items of this size. So we were using it for a batch, not for a single item. It's sort of like a sprint goal, but it was not exactly. So it was basically service level expectation was implied to batches.
So for a batch, it's officially it's a different forecasting tool. Your service level expectation is really for one item, based on one item. There's other techniques to do a batch of items. And that'll be for another call since we are out of time. Thank you so much, Greg. I don't know if you want to kind of us wrap it up. I know that we're at time. We have people who are online. I know people think that I want to say thank you. Thank you for those of you who joined tonight. Hopefully this helped. Hopefully you learned something. I know I went pretty basic on it. And I know we didn't get to our activity.
Well, do you have an activity that you can get within, 8 minutes or something?
It would probably be squeezing it through. We wouldn't
Okay.
have time to debrief on it. And debrief is often the
We'll just have to have you come back and do the activities on another event or something.
I'd love
This
that.
was great, Jennifer. This formalizes all the stuff that I've been working on for a while. So extremely valuable. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And Greg can put maybe we can put a link to the Kanban guide. So a lot of this comes really straight from that I used tonight. We can get a lot more in depth on things, but there's a really good baseline.
That would be great, the link.
Does anybody have any questions for Jennifer as we close out?
Can we have part two?
You want to do a part
Schedule part
two?
two at some point, and I guess that will be question to both Jennifer and Greg.
Yeah, we could do a part two.
Sure.
I didn't plan next week. Next month, I was going to do the be in neutral stance, and then we can come back for Kanban part two. I can make the arrangements with Jennifer. She's available.
Yeah, we can talk. We'll talk and see
Okay.
what works out on our calendars.
All right.
All right. Marmalade made
Thank
her
you.
official appearance here. So thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, Greg, will you be emailing that the Kanban guide link to it via email or how?
Yeah, I can send it to the group on Meetup.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Bob. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Thank you. I guess that's it. And broadcast.